Lou Primavera, PhD, one of our most popular guests here on the Retire Sooner podcast. And we wanted to have him back because I've been working on what the happiest retirees know, the 10 secrets for a happy, secure, joyful life. And I have an entire chapter dedicated, Lou, to marriage. And there's so many things I want to ask you about. And I want you to help our listeners as they make this difficult. Listen, getting into retirement is one thing, just personally. Getting into retirement and transitioning appropriately with your spouse, married, is a whole nother piece of the equation. And you've been a marriage counselor for so many years. Let's dive right into this. You called this you said it was something about war. What was it?
Yeah, war mediation. Because when people come to marriage counseling, they've already often just screwed it up so much and what you get is what we call the punch your ticket deal, where they say, all right, well, let's divorce. And one of the marriage partners says, wait a minute, let's try marriage counseling. And so you often are in the situation where you're really doing divorce counseling, you're not doing marriage counseling. But one of the things I've learned about marriage is that, every relationship has a contract. So let's take friendship, for instance. You have a friend, as a friend, that you have to be in contact with them, that you listen to them, that you hold things.
Confidentiality.
Confidentiality. And, all the aspects. It's not hard for people to tell you, well, what is the contract you have? And your contract with different friends are different because contracts have, this is what I'll do and this is what I'll get. This is what you'll do and this is what you get. And so they're different for each friend. Marriage has a contract, right? Is a contract. Then we know about the formal aspect. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about prenuptial agreements. I'm talking about the fact is that when you enter into a relationship, a contract evolves. And I often say there's two kinds of contracts. There's a conscious contract, one in which you actually negotiate.
You've actually discussed.
I'll do this and you do that and I'll do that. And then there's this kind of unconscious contract, which could be a result of the way you're brought up. Okay. So often we see our parents' marriage. It's hard for us not to incorporate that in some way and for us to maybe even model that unintentionally. I'm not talking about unconscious the way Freud talked about conscious. I'm talking about you don't say it out loud, but you can articulate it. And so often in marriage counseling, I would say to people, what's your contract? And they'd say, well, what do you mean? I said, well, let's take, for instance, finances. Who handles the finances? What are the rules about the finances? Does that person make all the decisions by themselves? Or are the mundane decisions can be made by them? And then the more important ones have to be negotiated and talked about. And then you could go through every aspect of a marriage, of living together, housework, taking care of the kids, sex and intimacy, private time together. Take any one of those things, it exists, it's there. And what I often would have people do is to say, it's one of the things we need to do first is to find out what the contract is.
But doesn't that obviously that evolves now? And you're saying it's two tracks, right? You've got the conscious of, hey, we talk, hey, no, we're supposed to talk about this is how we do it. And then there's the subconscious, which is this is what I'd like it to be like, but I haven't really communicated that effectively. Has that happened, I guess, to everybody?
And in fact, two things happen when marriages start to have problems. One is exactly that there are things they really would like to work on and work out, but it's not has happened. And the other is some life event changes, some major life event changes, and the contract changes. Let me give you an example. Okay. Charlie and Mary, I'll just make up two names. This is a real example. Okay. They're both school teachers. Okay. I forget what Mary taught, but Charlie taught music and he played the trumpet. And so the deal was Mary made all the decisions. She did all the socialization. She figured out what they were going to do. She made all the financial decisions. And Charlie came home and he played his trumpet. Right? And he taught his classes and he was a happy guy. All right. And they went along. And by the way, then he also, since Mary made all the decisions, he got to complain about it. But he had no responsibilities for it. And then what happened is Charlie's father owns a a business that does sprinkler systems,
Sure.
solar sprinkler systems, quite lucrative business. Charlie's father has a heart attack. Charlie has to quit teaching and take over the business.
Whoa.
Okay?
From trumpet teacher to fire safety installation.
Okay, he's got a whole bunch of people under him. He's got technicians. He has to learn the business. Okay.
How old are these two, by the way? How old is Charlie and Mary?
In their 50s.
Okay.
In their 50s, early 50s, I would say. And Charlie now has a phone in his car. This is before cell phones. All right. And he's got money. He's got more money. I mean, as a teacher, he's not, I don't have a lot of money. Now he's got lots of money. He drives a Mercedes. Okay. Well, all of a sudden now, he doesn't like it that Mary's making all these decisions. Okay. Well, wait a minute now. I don't like this deal anymore. Okay. He doesn't say it that way, but that's what happens. So they start to squabble over everything. All right. They start to fight. And they come to marriage counseling. And this was the typical session. He would sit there nice and quiet, and she would say things, and she would say, talk to me. And he would sit there, and finally he would get angry at her. By the way, I once said to him, gee, Charlie, you appear to be angry. He said, why do you accuse me of being angry? I said, accuse you? Anger is a normal human emotion, but he was not used to being angry. He was used to being laid back, and Mary made all the decisions. Well, she said to me one point, Dr. Primavera, Charlie needs drugs. Okay, because she couldn't control it anymore. See, she had total control, or at least a large amount of control, and now she didn't have it anymore. And she was very unhappy about that. And he was very unhappy about her constantly after him. And after all, this guy has a sense of power about him. So he never had a sense of being in charge of power. He had real money, real resources. He had all these people who were relying on him, all the workers relying on him. So they had it back and forth. And I'll tell you a funny story once. He comes into session angry as hell. And I said, gee, Charlie, what are you mad at? He said, we were having a discussion, and I said something, and she threw a Xanax down my throat. And so, but you see the literal physical attempt to control it and give him drugs. All right?
She wants him to calm down. She wants him to go back to the old Charlie.
Yeah, exactly. She can't understand this guy who has got all this business stuff to do, and he's schedules, and he's running around. This is not the laid back, passive guy who she could do whatever she wanted with. And they really had their problems and what I was trying to do is trying to get them to see the contract. I said, let's look at the old contract.
Okay.
Let's see the way it worked. What did you get out of this, Charlie? Yeah, I didn't have to worry about all that stuff. I don't have to worry about the bills got paid. Mary paid the bills, and, she made the social engagements, and, she made the decisions about the kids. And, I could just go to work and play my trumpet, and she, and so now it's different. He said, now I have a sense of what it means to be in charge, because I'm in charge now. And I don't want to do making all those decisions. I said, do you talk about it? Do you try to work it out and see if you could, in other words, what I tried to do in marriage counseling is to make that unconscious contract conscious, so that they can now decide to work on it and to either renegotiate it. And that's really what you have to do. It's so funny. I had a guy, he taught negotiations. He was a school teacher, but he worked for the union, taught negotiations. And he was talking about his wife. And I said to him one day, you teach negotiations. Why don't you negotiate with your wife? He said, what? I said, negotiate? What are you talking about? I said, listen, let's talk about negotiation, all right? When you deal with a negotiation, I say what I want, you say what you want. We look at the points of agreement, we look at the points of disagreement, and we have a discussion, and we try to resolve them and come up with some reasonable solution. He said, yeah, that's what I do. Well, why can't you do that with your marriage? He shook his head and said, I never thought of that.
So this would, the way you're describing this, and this is a pretty extreme example, right? So passive Charlie becomes the boss, and then it's a really tough transition between him and Mary.
Sure.
And they have an old contract, and they've never talked about the new contract. But doesn't this happen Lou, almost like I would say a lot of marriages, so many things change
all the time as people. And that's the reason why if you don't have a constant dialogue, you're going to do this. You're going to go in different directions. Okay. And now you take retirement. All right. Well, look at all the adjustments one has to make when you go from working to the contract changes. Let's say the wife is still working and the husband is home.
Right. Not everybody retires at the same time.
That's
right. In fact, it's normal to have one spouse working and one not yet.
It's best if you can do it together. But as you point out, it's clearly not going to happen often. And so now things change. So let's say you take a husband who let's say he was a financial advisor or he worked at a bank and now he's home. Well, the wife says, well, wait a minute. Hold on. The deal has to be different. Okay. The deal has to be different now. All right. You have to take on certain things for two reasons. Number one, there's less money. So maybe the things that you used to hire somebody to do, you can't do. All right. And the other thing is I'm working full time and you're not working. Now, sometimes, but again, if you talk about it, you talk about the transition. If you talk about it before you actually retire, if you recognize that these are going to be the issues, it gives you an opportunity to work out a deal.
But what you're also saying is that even though we go through these different life events, and retirement is a huge one, right? That's a huge one that can throw people into different orbits. This happens all the time. We've got kids out of school, then they're in school, then they're in the house, and they're out of the house. They're too young to drive. Now they're driving. Change of job, change of responsibility. That happens throughout our entire marriage, though.
Exactly. And
how do you go back and what are we supposed to do? Because I guess to your point, it's okay and normal for the terms of the deal. But maybe this is the wrong verbiage. Help me with this. The terms of the deal different, or it's just how we operate together is different?
Yeah, it's both because the conditions change. The contract is based on the conditions. How much time who does the checkbook? All right. Now, my family, I do the checkbook. Why? Because I like to do it. My wife's not crazy about it. Could she do it? She's more than capable of doing it. She's a brilliant woman. She's more than capable of doing it. However, I like to do it, and it works out fine. Now, our thing with any major decision financially, even some of the minor ones, we talk about it. We keep a dialogue. And that's the point. Keep a dialogue because things will change. The kids in and out of the house is a big change. It changes. It changes how much time you have together, and, those kind of things. And it's I have done a lot of if you're a Catholic and you get married, you have to do something called pre-Cana. Okay.
Say that again. It's called pre-Cana?
Cana, C-A-N-A. It's based on the biblical wedding of Cana. All right. It's the idea is before marriage.
Okay.
And you have to go for preparation. I actually wrote a program for pre-Cana with a theologian. And a lot of it had to do with getting prepared for marriage. And that's the idea, getting prepared for marriage, getting people to think about things like, how are you going to handle finances? What are you going to do about the kids? How about free time? How about time together? How about time alone? All the kinds of things that are part of living that you have to work out together.
How do you propose that we do this? Give me logistically, couples that get this right, are they just naturally good communicators and they're every Sunday they kind of readjust? If somebody hasn't done this, which I would suspect not everybody's great at this, how would you counsel somebody today, our listeners, just say, look, go back to your spouse and do what to get back on the same page?
The thing is that we all like to avoid conflict. Even the smartest of us and the toughest of us like to avoid conflict. And you have to say, if you avoid these discussions, here's what's going to happen. They're going to go somewhere, but you're going to have no control over them. So if you can talk to your wife about talking about these things, you got to talk about talking about it. You have to say, listen, we're going to go through a major life change. Okay. And how are we going to handle it? I remember when my son was born, I picked my wife up from the hospital and she had him in his arms and I looked at her and said, start letting go now.
And you said what? Say that again. I'm sorry.
Start letting go now. And she looked at me and I said, look, things are going to change. All right. In the beginning, they're going to be very dependent on you and dependent on me. And then that'll change and things will evolve. And that's what I mean about having a dialogue and talking about even the most ordinary things, because you create a habit of mutual problem solving.
I love your point that even the toughest of us that are the most direct
Right.
don't necessarily want to just engage in it's always a little bit conflictual, because you're talking about you for those listeners, what Dr. Primavera just said here is that we're always on this V road, if you will. If we're not reconnecting, we're separating to some extent.
Exactly.
And it's our job as spouses and partners to kind of continue to come back to center.
That's
and
right.
it takes simply, and this is the kind of advice, by the way, I use your advice. And that's one of the things on this podcast I've actually, from the experts that we have here, it really is helpful to hear something as simple as talking about it, because that in itself is helpful. Literally just saying, hey, you know what, honey, I was talking to a 25, 30-year marriage counselor, PhD, knows what he's talking about. And he reminded me that it's really helpful for us just to recognize that we need to have these conversations. They don't have to be difficult, but the thought of actually, particularly in the busy marriages, we're all busy, got kids,
Sure.
got work, and it's easy to put it off and not bring it up. Easy to put it off, not bring it up. But the thought of just once in a while sitting, recognizing how helpful it is to communicate with your spouse and say, look, let's talk about the changes that we're all going through so that we're back to kind of the center of the road together, as opposed to this fork that's getting bigger.
Exactly. And I'll tell you something interesting. I've counseled some marriages where the way I used to do marriage counseling was I would see them together once each separately, and then from then on together. And I know some of the family therapists say, oh, you should never see them separately. But I always want to see them separately once, because I want to know what I'm dealing with. Okay? Am I really counseling 2 people or 4 people or 3 people? All right? Is there something? I mean, I have actually had a situation where I'm talking to the couple and they really want to, they both expressed that they really want to, work this out. And then I talked to the husband, and he's already got a girlfriend and an apartment already. He's gone. He's gone. But one of the things that really used to get to me with marriages that I saw were, I think, pretty much doomed, was I learned more in that 1 hour than they knew about their own person.
Because they're just afraid to communicate.
They don't talk to each other. They just get to that where they don't talk to each other. And, it's part, we don't talk about communication, but it's more than just words. It's really telling, look, this is what's sharing. Things like fears are very important. I mean, look, we get older. As we get older, the specter of death is upon us. The specter of ill health is upon us. And having someone that you can talk to and share those fears with without repercussion is very important. It's extremely.
You mentioned, so you've been doing marriage therapy for, I know, let's call it 30 plus years.
Well, I stopped doing, I'm done with it now, because I am, nights and weekends and stuff. And I had enough after a while.
Technically you're still doing it because we're talking about it.
I did it for a long time.
But what was the percentage? You had mentioned that it was almost war counseling and people had made up their mind or they didn't really want to work it out. What is the percentage? If I'm on the outside looking in and I see 100 people come to you because they obviously are seeking some sort of help, that's a pretty proactive move. What's the percentage of them that stay married versus get divorced?
They're punching their ticket. I had somebody
meaning they're just checking a box. They're not really trying to work.
They're just saying we tried everything. Okay, and it's a small percentage, but I'll tell you one thing.
Wait, a small percentage that it actually works out for?
Yeah, because when they come, it's already damaged. I'll tell you one thing though. I can't always predict it. I had one couple which I was sure that I was, talking to a wall, not talking to each other. And a couple of years later, I get a phone call from the wife and saying, would you be willing to take on my brother and his wife and to do for them what you did for us? And I said, what did I do for you? Oh, you got us talking together and we got to mutual problem solving. And what I wanted to say, what I said to myself was, they were really paying attention.
You guys were actually listening.
Actually listening.
So is it fair to say that 75% of folks that end up in counseling end up getting divorced?
I don't really want to venture a number, but it's really hard to say because it's when they come. They don't come when it's time to really. That's why I believe that pre-marriage and premarital preparation and thinking and reading is really very important. Okay, you know the thing that I have found that when people go to some kind of premarital counseling or whatever, is that a success is if they figure out what they have to do to make the marriage work, or the fact they say this ain't going to work, and because divorces are ugly. And the longer you've been in a marriage, the more you have accumulated. I'm talking about children and mutual, about money, and how vicious things get. And I'm telling you, I used to say to couples in marriage counseling, listen to me, when people break up, there's a lot of rage. And they look at me like, rage? I say, yeah, not anger, rage. There's a sense of I wasted my life. And there's rage. The Eagles have a song called Wasted Time.
Wasted Time. I love the Eagles. I don't know. I can't place it.
Wasted Time. Play it. You'll see. And it's about this issue of, I spent all this time, now we're breaking up, and now and at the end he said, maybe you'll come to realize it wasn't wasted time. Because that's what people say. When a marriage breaks up, there's a lot of broken dreams. It's not only broken promises, it's broken dreams. Things that you visioned at one point, the way you were going with your life, and how you're going to do this together. And now you're breaking apart. And there's a sense of, God, I wasted all that time. Well, speaking
of that, so communication, we're not continuing to modify the contract. That seems like a primary issue and mistake that you see.
Absolutely.
In a lot of marriages, particularly the ones that end up in counseling. And then we're moving towards that group that they're not on the same page. So they end up, speaking of music, I'm thinking of God Bless the Broken Road That Has Led Me to You. You're talking about Eagles songs. I think that's a Rascal Flatts song. But let's talk about second marriages. So I'm constantly trying to find out the correlation between happiness and a variety of habits, or a variety of habits in the happy camp versus the unhappy camp. And one of them very clearly is marriage. Having a partner leads to much higher levels of happiness in retirement, period. It's not even close. So what I also wanted to understand is, does divorce lead to higher levels of unhappiness? And I found in my research that it does not, at least for the first divorce.
Yeah,
second marriages in my research seem to be happiness levels seem to be the same as first marriages. The second, the third and fourth and fifth marriages that I've recorded, definitely an issue there. Happiness levels plummet. But let's talk about the second marriage. Do you feel as though they are, in your experience, are people a little better at it the second time around?
It really depends why you got married the first time. All right, people get married for all kinds of reasons. All right, one is, I've seen it. I was in a band. I don't know if I mentioned.
You're a drummer, right?
I was a professional drummer, and I remember getting on the bandstand one night. We were playing a couple nights a week, and the guitar player gets on the bandstand. He looks at me, he goes, "It's time to get married." I said, "Oh, Bill, did you meet somebody?" "No, not yet, but it's really time for me to get married." So what he told me, so I'm 25 or 24, whatever he was. I'm 25, and I really need to get married. And he did get married, and I found out later he got divorced, because people if you get married for that reason, or you get married for whatever, for some social reason or parental pressure, the marriage is not going to work. All right. Because marriage is tough. You know that. You're married, it's tough. You got to work at it all the time.
All the time.
55 years last Friday. It was 55 years. All
For
right?
you. So you're at least we're hearing from somebody that has it figured out.
Yeah, and we worked it out, and we work hard at it. We still work at it. Every day we sit and we talk. We have a thing. We get up in the morning, I make the coffee, get everything ready because I'm a morning person. My wife is not. She gets up and we sit on the couch. We've been doing this for years, and we talk. And we talk about mundane things and important things. Depends what's going on. Okay. But I think if you get married for other than because you really want to be together and you really value each other, really care about each other, that marriage doesn't work out. Hopefully you find that. And the reason why the second one is because maybe you find that maybe you're not mature enough. Okay. And you find it the second time. But if you have a multiple marrier, okay, somebody's marrying 4 or 5 times, that's just somebody's never going to be satisfied with anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I did know actually a very famous psychologist. I won't tell you his name. He was married. He's passed on, married 5 times. And I said to him, Art, what's with the married and remarried? He goes, I like being married. I said, apparently you don't like staying married. Things didn't work out and he would move on. And, and it's just that's a lack of being able to really work and build a relationship over time. As you know, you've been married a while, your relationship is at 55 years, our relationship is quite different in many ways than it was day one. But yet there are certain common things. We always like being together. We always like talking together. We always like, doing things together. And we enjoyed bouncing ideas off each other. I remember that when we were dating, and my wife said to me one time, something really worries me. I said, what, honey? She said, we're going to run out of things to talk about. And I said, never going to happen because life's going to keep throwing us things. And but by the way, I really relish that because the first time I was correct because she's a very smart woman. And every once in a while I'd say to her, have we run out of things to talk about yet? No, because when you really care and like each other, when you really like each other, it's very funny. I gave a talk to a bunch of high school kids about marriage, and I said, don't marry anybody you don't like. And they all laughed.
Yeah, of course, right?
Having done marriage counseling, I'm not kidding. There are people who get married for all kinds of reasons, and not because they like each other. They like to be together. They like to share things together. And even if you don't,
for example, that's actually, it's funny. That's a very interesting concept. I hadn't really thought of it ever that way, but I guess that we think default, 2 people are in love. But to your point, it doesn't happen all the time at all. Like, give me an example of a marriage that is not 2 people that don't like each other.
It turns out that those 2 people I just talked about don't like each other. They ended up divorced.
We're talking about, let's go back to Charlie and Mary.
Yeah, they ended up divorced. And it ended up that, it's so funny. He leaves the house, he gets a girlfriend. He wants to come back. His wife said, you can't come back unless you go see the psychiatrist and get medication. He calls me up. I say, go. And he calls me up from his car and he says, you were right. The psychiatrist said, you were right. And he said, your wife's just going to have to learn, the 2 of you are going to have to learn to rework things out. They never could. And he ended up not liking it. People don't like each other because it becomes too much work.
Do they grow do couples grow to not like each other? Do you feel like they typically didn't really like each other to begin with?
I think both happens. They may not be, they just want to be together for whatever reason. Okay. They want to be married.
Societal. It's time.
Whatever the reasons are. Okay. And then they don't grow together. So they grow apart and then they'll get to really dislike each other. And you've met divorced people who talk about their ex in the most damning.
Oh God. Yes. They hate each other. Almost always. Not always, but almost always. They just. It
is rare that people can divorce and not be angry at each other, because again, think about it. It's not just it's broken dreams. The one thing as human beings is we have dreams, we have fantasies, ideas of where we want to go with life. We want to do this, we want to do that, and And when you get married, you often will have things that you think about doing together, and those things get broken in a divorce, and rage comes up. And I used to say to people, and they say rage, and I say, yeah, rage is like brain cancer, makes you stupid. You can do stupid things.
Mm-hmm.
Can I give you an example?
Please.
Okay, family physician. Okay, that's important to understand. Going through a divorce with his wife. Okay, calls Child Protective Services. Says, my wife is a terrible mother. Now, he knows it's not true. He's just angry at her. Child Protective Services goes in, they interview, they look at the home, they talk to the kids, and they say, it's fine. So I said, do you realize what he's done? He's just taken away any argument he has for him having custody of the children. And he should know better. He's a family physician.
So just out of rage and spite,
stupid. I mean, people do things, they just do these things. I mean, you say, you did what? Because they're angry and they want to be spiteful.
Lou, let me ask this. If you were to, and you've seen, I mean, you just told a story where you've counseled people where you didn't think they would get back together, but they did.
They did.
What is can you point to any one, and I'm going to call it a medicine, that's the wrong word for it, but something that helps rescue. If you're going to rescue a marriage, you're going to have to do what? Okay.
If they come into a marriage counseling hurting and they really say, I don't really want to get a divorce. All right. And if they listen and they begin to develop the habits that will create a better relationship, that's the medicine. The medicine is, we talk about communication. It's more than communication. It's communication and negotiation. You can't just talk to each other. It's very funny. I had a couple, and I watched them, and one would talk, and the other one would sit there like this. Can you see my arms folded? And what the message was, all right, let him talk. When he's done, then I'll tell you really what's going on.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not only just talking, listening, but also willingness to negotiate and work out solutions to problems. And if you want a medicine, that's a medicine. Learn how to negotiate, learn how to ask what you want, listen to what they want, and work out something that works out. By the way, negotiation is different than compromise.
What is the difference in a marriage? What is the difference between negotiation and compromise? I don't understand.
I'll tell you. I want to go to Alaska. You want to go to Florida. Let's get the map and find halfway in between. That doesn't work.
Denver is not the right compromise.
No.
Okay.
I spend a week in Alaska and a week in Florida.
Okay.
That's a compromise. That's a negotiation.
That's a negotiation. Right. Okay.
Is that each person in a negotiation, and business negotiations, everybody has to walk away that they got something and that they gave something. That helps create the bond. Is that not only did I get something, but I gave something.
Gosh, I can just think of my wife right now thinking Michigan, right? She wants to go, we're in the South, right? I'm in Atlanta. She's from Michigan, but it's always, let's go Michigan. And for 20 years, we've been going up there. Eventually I grew to actually love Michigan. So I like it too now. But we still haven't gone to Montana, which is where I at least I think that's where I'd like to be going. But I'm going to make sure that we don't meet in the middle, and Denver's not the answer. So, okay.
But that is the idea. I had a guy, a young man that worked for me and became a psychologist eventually, and he went through a divorce, and he said to me, he was my student at the time, and he said to me, I don't understand. I said, well, Bill, what do you mean? He goes, well, I washed the floor one week and she washed the floor the other week, and she went, and he had this 50-50 idea. Okay, but I said, that's not what marriage is about. He said, what is marriage? I said, marriage is 100-100. You give what you have to give. Okay, you give what you have to give. You don't, if you have this kind of, and by the way, it doesn't even work in business. This 50-50 idea doesn't work in business. You know that. It doesn't work.
It's 100-100. I love that idea.
People have to give what they have to give, and that'll change from situation to situation. So some situations, somebody has a lot to give and the other person doesn't. In the other situation, it switches around. But you feel in general, that the person is doing their best and giving what they have to give.
I want to ask your opinion on some of the research that I'm writing about. And
Sure.
again, I write a little bit about health and a little bit about marriage. I'm obviously not a health expert, nor am I a marriage expert, but I'm trying to emulate and understand what happy folks do happy retirees do when it comes to their marital habits, and what do they do, again, health-wise, what are their habits, and try to work effectively reverse engineer happiness in retirement. That's been my study for now, at least a decade. And I guess one chapter I have in the book has to do with different phases of marriage and what those phases look like. I want to ask you a couple of those. And then one chapter, or one part of that chapter, has to do with marital intimacy. And I actually have surveyed large populations about, hey, how often are you intimate? How many, God forbid, how many times do you have sex in a given year or a month or a week? So I'm going to ask you about that in a second, but let's start with the happiness on the journey through marriage. And essentially what I found, if I were to look at my chart, is that early on, we have a phase where it's almost this honeymoon phase, and it's really easy. And there's a really high level of, hey, marriage is really good. And then you get into this, I call it this initial budget shock, where maybe you start to have kids, and all of a sudden you can't afford all the things you want. And now it's not just you and your spouse. You have to coordinate from, it used to be me. Now it was us, or now it was me and you, and now it's them, the kids. And that takes a hit. Then you get sticker shock when it comes to kids going to college. True. And then eventually we get to the point where marriage, it seems to me, once you get to the 30-year mark, you essentially have said, look, we've made it this far. We might as well keep going. And marriage levels just rise and rise and rise almost after that. What are the phases that you see over, and if that relates, if any of that makes sense, or
no, it
what
makes
do you
a lot
see?
of sense. In fact, it's the same thing as in retirement. People start out on a high because all they focus in is on the benefits. Then the reality starts setting in, and they start having to make decisions and adjustments, and they begin to be not so happy. And then eventually, if they get it together, and not everybody does, in our book, we found that there's not a lot of people who are extremely well adjusted to either marriage or to retirement. We didn't do marriage. We did retirement. But what happens is you need a readjustment. You always need readjustment. That's the point. At every stage, because you're together in the beginning. You get married, let's say you have an apartment. There's not a lot to take care of. You can focus a lot on yourself. You can go out to eat. There's more money than will be in the future. Now you get a house. Now you got a home. I always say to new homeowners, go rent the movie The Money Pit. Because all houses are money pits. And so now you got a whole different situation. It's not only do you have less money, but you got to take care of things, either by paying for them or doing them yourself. All right. Now you bring kids into the situation. Now you got a whole different. So every single time, if you have a strong bond and you have a strong habit of working together, communicating and negotiating, you'll take a look at that situation and you'll say, here are the things we have to do. Now, my wife and I have always said, we hit a point where we say, okay, listen, here are the issues. You handle this, I'll handle this, we'll handle this together. All right. And if you don't have that habit, the more stresses you put on a marriage, the less likely it is to survive. Now, once you have a habit of doing that, as you're going along, it'll get easier and easier and easier. I mean, we've gotten to the point where we start fighting and then we start laughing. Come on, we've been down that road, but we don't have to fight that. We don't have to have that anymore.
We already had this fight 7 different times. But so the pressures of life make marriage harder after the first few years.
Absolutely. And, and the responsibilities. And if you're in a profession where you rise, you have more responsibility, you have more things to take care of, more stresses. It really is. If you can build up, and I always tell people, premarital stuff is that you can build up the habit of working together, and take on each challenge, recognize it's a challenge, and work together. You have a good shot of making it. Right.
When you're transitioning into retirement, though, again, let's talk about that. When you're married, you transition into retirement
That's
together.
correct.
You've got the added stressor that is, hey, we have to adjust to retirement, first of all.
Now we have to adjust. Now we have to read your book, read my book. We have to see what some of the things are that we have to talk about that are going to happen.
Let's talk about a couple of those things. I'm a huge believer in core pursuits. That's just my version of
Absolutely
a hobby on steroids, your purpose in life. There's a lot of ways to look at it. I look at them as actual things that you love to do that you want to get better at. And they can be anything, right? Happy retirees have 3.6. Unhappy retirees have, let's call it, unhappy retirees have, gosh, I wish I would, 3.6 versus 2. Was it, Marissa, where are we? I've got so many different happy versus, is it 1.9?
Yeah, it does.
Unhappy?
Yeah. What is my unhappy stat? I think it's 1.9. Hang on.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, that's what it is. Happy retirees have 3.6 core pursuits. Unhappy have, let's call it 1.9 or less than 2. So you've got this big disparity between the number of different things that we want to do. When we get into marriage or when we get into retirement, and really and I think this is probably the question is in marriage in general, these core pursuits, how important do you see it being? The husband has a set of their own core pursuits that they love to continue to get better at and spend time at. And then the wife does too. And they're very happy in that way. Or do they have to have them together? And they have to have new. Tell me about what your thoughts are on that.
They have to be supportive of each other, at least not resent them. Let me give you an example. I love music. All right. We didn't have end tables in our living room for years because I had speakers. Now, is my wife crazy about music? She likes music, not like I do.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I have music everywhere in the house. It's okay. She'll encourage it. When I went out to buy a higher end stereo, I said, gee, she said, buy the whole thing. Just buy the whole thing. And if I ask her why, she because you love it and it puts a smile on your face. And she loves to read. She's an avid reader. All right. And I think it's very important that you can do some things together. That's great. All right. But that you also, it's more than just have different things, that you support each other's things that you like to do. So, if I wanted to buy something for me, just buy it. Don't worry about it.
Because I love that terminology, because you love it.
Yeah. Because
now what if, and this I've seen this or heard this argument many times from couples I've worked with over the years, where one spouse says he needs to do more stuff, or she doesn't have enough stuff to do, or he needs more hobbies, particularly because I've written about this for a long time. I've written about these core pursuits. I'll have one of the spouses say, Bill or Bob or Jim, he needs more to do. Do you see that as an issue? And how do you solve that, Lou?
You can't make, what? One of the things we say in our book at the end is one of the things you should do is to constantly explore, constantly experiment and explore. That process in itself is a good process. People need to have, but not everybody has to have the same things or the same kind of things. Like my wife likes to watch certain things on TV. Not for me, that's fine, but I support it. It's great for her to do it. She likes to do that. Okay. She finds that like a bubble gum. We call it bubble gum for the mind. Is that, this is an activity that it's not going to be, it's not going to teach you anything. It's just going to be,
that's your wife calling you, Lou.
No, that's actually one of my chairs. I'll talk to her later. All right. And it's really important that we support each other's interests. That's critical. And when somebody says to me, he should be doing more, why are you saying that? Is it because he's not supportive of you or she's not supportive of you? Is because they're not allowing you to do the things you want to do? Is that the reason why you think they need to do more? Okay. Because quite frankly, I would never tell my wife she needs to do more. I wouldn't do it. If she wants to do something, I'm supportive of it. she's supportive of the things I want to do. And I think that's really the more important issue.
But if you've got a couple where, let's say let's say the wife has a tennis team and has the let's call it a walking club and a hiking club and loves to travel and has 10 different loves that she's constantly doing, very active. And the husband, on the other hand, has kind of been all work for all these years. Nice husband, great guy, let's say, and supportive of the family, maybe good father, maybe arguably pretty good husband, let's say. But you get closer to retirement or even some other phase, maybe the kids are out of the house now, and one of the two spouses, they really don't have a whole lot of different things that they've engaged in because maybe they're very focused on one thing, like work. Do you see people able to, or have you ever seen an example of how one spouse helps another spouse get out of that?
Yeah.
How does that, tell me how to fix that? Because I see that a lot, Lou.
You know what? You can't make it, listen, I'm going to fix you.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that. Don't do that. All right? Don't say, I'm going to fix you. Say, look, I'm thinking that you've focused your whole life on work. It's time for you to find some things you deserve now, to find some things that are fun for you. So what have you been thinking about? Okay. What kinds of things? Now, you may not have it in your head as you want, but maybe you want to start to explore some of the things you might want to try to do. And I'll be supportive of that. I will do whatever I can to help you look for those things. All right. And if you approach your spouse like you're going to fix them, that's not going to work.
By the way, usually those couples that I'm describing, and I've had many of these over the years, usually they do lead to divorce, by the way.
Yeah. But that's because what the person is saying is there's something lacking in you.
Right.
And look at me. I am doing all these things and there's something lacking in you that won't work. But you could help. And I've seen people that you can help that person explore and find things that they might find interesting. There's some people think vacation for them is sitting on a beach and sipping pina coladas. And I have a niece and nephew that love that. That's love that. I would find that deathly. I want to go
deathly.
I want to go look at things. I want to go see things. I want to learn something. All right. So what is a pleasurable thing for me is not a pleasurable thing for someone else. And when you're in a marriage, you can't look at what someone else does and say, "Oh, I don't know why you want to do that." I mean, But you can say to somebody, "Look, this is your time now to explore things. You've worked all your life. You've been a great provider. Now it's time for you to go have some fun and do some things. And I'm going to support. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to support whatever it is that you want to explore."
I love that advice. Let's talk about another part of my marriage chapter has to do with intimacy. And I asked the question about how often are you intimate? Is that something that needs to continue forever into your 60s, 70s, 80s, et cetera? Can you speak to that a little bit? I did find some levels where it was still really important, at least from my happiness chart, was that there's still sex/intimacy, at least at a certain level or a certain frequency. And folks are gonna have to buy what the happiest retirees know to actually see the chart, But what is your take on that, Lou?
Well, it's more than just having intercourse. It's touching each other, kissing, hugging, caressing each other, spending time together, holding hands. I mean, my wife is big and I love holding hands with her. She fits right here, by the way. I always say she's absolutely perfect for me. She fits right here. Okay.
By the way, that's every time when you're talking about your wife, the phone rings. I think, oh, that's her calling. The
No, it's not.
but Lou, so again, that's actually a really interesting point. It's not just about how often we sleep together, or maybe not sleep together. It's really not just about intimacy / sex. It's about, are we holding hands? Are we just
Touching each other,
hugging
each other, you know,
kissing goodbye in the morning?
If you sit around, the old joke, people sitting around and they look at each other. Okay, let's have sex. That's not real intimacy. That's just, I call it gymnastics. Okay, that what you really want is intimacy. Intimacy is saying loving things to each other, touching each other, kissing, holding each other. Sometimes I'll just grab a hold of my wife and just hug her. All right, and I think all those things. It's not just having intercourse, because you can have intercourse and you're having intercourse with one person, but you're someplace else. That happens. People have fantasies during intercourse, and it's not it. And I think it's more important for women than for men. And women really like intimacy, touching and care and saying that and loving things. And I'm married 55 years. I bring my wife flowers often.
Oh boy. All right.
And to me, flowers, but it puts a smile on her face. And I said, if that does it, I love it.
Wow. That's a good reminder. By the way, guys, that's a good reminder. What is it? So let's talk about the difference between men and women. What are the needs, the different needs? You just touched on this between women and men.
Women want attention, but I'm not talking about 40 over, but they want to be paid attention. They want connection. Women are better at connection than men are. Oh, they are. They're better at connection than men are. All right, and so I think it's very important for a man. I had to learn this. That certain things. For you know about that book, Men Are From Venus, Women Are From
Mars. Men are from Pluto, women are from.
Yeah, but there is one very good point, and men tend to be problem solvers. And women, and so what'll happen is, I did this with my wife, and once in a while I still do it, and I have to stop myself. She'll present a problem, and all of a sudden I'll come up with a solution. She'll say, that's not what I want. I want you to listen to me. Just let me go on and tell you what I'm thinking. And so I think men, sometimes we tend to be problem solvers. You want to fix it. Let's fix it. And I'm really a fixer. I love to fix problems. That's what I do for a living. I'm a dean. I'm in charge. I get those phone calls are problems. I guarantee when I call them back, there'll be issues I have to deal with. And so women like to just listen. And once in a while I have to say to myself, shut up and listen. Just listen to what she has. So of course I'll say to her, honey, you just want me to listen, right? She'll say, yes.
By the way, I don't care if you're male or female. If you're listening to this, you immediately in your mind are saying, wow, I could be doing a lot better in a lot of ways. When it comes, these are such good reminders that when we're running busy lives, that these are really important. There's so many important things we've talked about today that hopefully I feel like this is like a free counseling session for me to be a better spouse.
I'll tell you, Wes, I have to constantly remind myself. Because there are times when I'll start and I'll say, well, wait a minute. You don't really want me to do this, do you? And she'll say, no. So you want me to shut up and listen? Okay, go ahead. But I have to remind myself. And sometimes I'll say, you know what I just did? I'm sorry. I really should have just shut up and listened.
Gosh. I'm literally improving as a husband, listening, having this conversation. Now, I don't know how long it'll last, Lou. It might only last like a couple of weeks, and then I'm going to forget everything. So I'll go back and listen.
That's true. I think, I don't know, that there are seminal moments in people's lives where things change them, and we all have those we can point to. But there are lessons we need to learn over and over again. And that's the other thing, If someone would say to me, what's one of the most important things in making a successful marriage? I'd say forgiveness.
Well, that was going to be my last question. So we're going to end it here. So for the number one, your favorite piece of advice is what?
Forgiveness. You always forgive. You know, it's interesting. We forgive for ourselves as much as we forgive for the other person.
Explain that. What do you mean by that?
Because if you don't forgive, you chew on it and you ruminate and you keep saying negative things to yourself and you suffer for it. When you forgive, you have an opportunity, not easily, to let it go. And then you have also an opportunity to come up with a solution. Because if you don't forgive, if you find yourself never forgiving anybody, you end up a pretty angry, bitter person.
So why not be able to forgive your spouse as well?
And to forgive yourself.
Forgive yourself as well.
You have to start to forgive yourself, you know, because listen, we're all fallible. We all make lots of mistakes. It's part of the deal. So if we can say, you know what? And there are times I can say to her, like, boy, I screwed up. I totally missed the whole boat on this thing. And she'll say to me, yeah, okay. You know, and so I forgive myself. And then if, you know, I can forgive other people.
Maybe one last question. I want to ask about family and the role of either your adult kids or your parents when it comes to, particularly as you're thinking about going into retirement. And when this is Retire Sooner, we have, hold on, the Retire Sooner podcast. There's lots of, let me restart. The Retire Sooner podcast, not everybody is headed into retirement. A lot of our listener base is thinking about this well into the future. So they're not necessarily they're not retiring anytime too soon. But when it comes to the role of the family and either your kids' role in your relationship or your parents' role in your relationship, these can be important ingredients and they can hurt or help. Do you have any advice around, particularly as you're transitioning into retirement? What about the role of the family?
You have to talk to them. You have to talk to your children and say, look, dad's going to retire, you know, or mama's going to retire, and our lives are going to change. And this is how it's going to change. And this is how it's going to affect you as best we can tell. And we need you to listen to what we have to say, and we're willing to hear what you have to say. And you know, when you marry, you don't marry a person, you marry a family, whether you like it or not. Okay. And, you know, it's interesting. I had a guy who was going through a divorce, and he said, tomorrow I go down to court and I have my mother-in-law will now lie to help her daughter. And he said, that doesn't bother me. You know what bothers me? I said, why? He said, she was my friend.
Oh, the mother-in-law was?
Yeah. I now lost a friend. I used to go out to lunch with her. We would talk on the phone, and now I've lost a good friend. And so if you think about that, it's not just two people, it's a network. And
that's one of the other reasons that a divorce is so difficult for so many reasons.
For that reason.
It's you're losing their family.
You're losing all kinds of things. And there are people, unfortunately, whether you want to or not, they will take sides. And you can discourage them from doing that, but they're going to do it anyway. And you know, it's just extremely important to understand if you're going through a life change, whatever that life change is, the people who it's going to affect, it's really helpful if you talk to them and listen to them. And it doesn't mean that they'll make your decision. It means that you're aware that this is going to impact on them, and you want to listen to what they have to say about the impact and try to work something out so that it works the best it can. But you can't, you know, we don't live in a vacuum. We live in a social network, and everything.
What is it? How long have you, and again, your many, many years of experience in this, divorce is devastating, and it certainly is it's like a car wreck, right? I've seen it so many times.
Sure.
For family members and families that I've worked with. Does it take? I'm trying to think how long. It feels like it's kind of a year recovery for a lot of people.
At least, and some parts of it never go away. You know, talk to a person who's been divorced for 10 years and say, "Tell me about your spouse."
You mean, which one? You mean the ex one?
Yeah.
So 10 years later, it's still.
There's still a lot of resentment because of the broken dreams. I really do believe that that's the thing. It's like, go listen to that Eagles song, Wasted Time.